Welcome to the church family that is lifting lives through living love, inspiring hope, filling with faith, and transforming our world. These recorded messages are made available so that you might have additional opportunities to stay connected with us and that you might learn and grow in your faith. God bless you as you hear the word today. And now, the message.
Our scripture reading is taken from 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 4 through 9. For when one says, I follow Paul, or another, I follow Apollos, are you not mere human beings? What, after all, is Apollos? And what is Paul? Only servants through whom you came to believe, as the Lord has assigned to each his task. I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God has been making it grow. So neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but only God who makes it grow. The one who plants and the one who waters have one purpose, and they will each be rewarded according to their own labor. For we are co-workers in God's service. You are God's field, God's building. May the Lord add his blessing to the reading and the hearing of his word.
Friends, I am so excited to be sharing the next part of our Sown series this morning. This is actually my first time that I've gotten to preach here since starting here at Zionsville UMC. And since it's my first time, I wanted to just take a brief moment and share a few things that would help introduce myself, get you acclimated with me and me with you a little more, so you could know a little more about me. And I thought we could do them Letterman style, counting down 5 to 1. The first is that I am an apple aficionado. I know nothing about cigars, very little about wine or beer, but I know a tremendous amount about different varieties of apples. I love apples. They're my favorite fruit. And I think that apple cider is probably the greatest beverage on the face of the earth. So part of it goes back to number 4, which is the fact that I am from Western New York State, where we have a tremendous number of apple varieties to choose from. I grew up in a small dairy farming community in Western New York, where my family has lived for about 7 generations, 4 of which they've had a small general store that they've owned and operated, so since 1910. I also love being outdoors, and so I love biology. I just like being out in the created world and seeing the glory of God. And as a result, I went to Penn State and studied biology. I have a bachelor's of science in biology before I went to Asbury for seminary. It kind of gears how I am, though. I still bring that science background to the way I approach things. I'm kind of analytical. My wife said early in our marriage that to better understand me, she watched CBS's sitcom, The Big Bang Theory. And that helped her just kind of get how I'm geared. She goes, I understand you better now. I said, okay, take that for what you will. But Chastity and I have been married for 7 years, and I love her dearly. For the last 2.5, we've been chasing our daughter Evelyn around, who is a ball of energy. And it's like, she drains the energy that I have. So, it's a kind of a relationship there. But we love her so much. And the one thing that I want you to know the most is that I love seeing people become fully devoted, faithful followers of Jesus Christ. Whether that's somebody coming to faith for the first time and deciding to follow Jesus, or whether it's somebody who's been walking with Jesus for a while, understand the gifts and talents and callings that God has placed on their life to go and live out their faith, right, every day. Because I believe that faith is about what we do, not just today, what we do gathered here, but what we do Monday through Saturday. And that our church, some of the greatest ministries that we do, some of the greatest things happen outside the walls of this building, as great a building as it is and as great a programs as we have. That's where it happens. It happens out in the world. I'm passionate about seeing people become disciples of Jesus Christ because there are so many people that need to hear the wonderful news that God loves them so much. It's why Chastity and I have been involved in starting a new community of faith in the Whitestown area. For the 56% of people who do not have a community of faith which they're a part, we call this rooted communities because it's about being rooted in Jesus. We want to see everybody have the opportunity to hear the love that God has for them, to know somebody who authentically follows Jesus. We live in a free country where you can worship as you please. We have free will, so we can do what we want. But we want everybody to have the opportunity to at least hear and to know, right? There are 140,000 people within 20 minutes of this building who are not part of a community of faith. The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. We believe that God is calling us to always go out and sow the love of God abundantly in the world where we are. That's what our Sown series is really about this Lent. We've been focusing on the fact that God calls us to go out and share his news, to share his love so freely because it's needed, because there's so many who have not heard. We were reminded several weeks ago in Pastor Dave's message from chapter 20 that just as Jesus had been sent into the world by God the Father, so he sends his disciples into the world on the same mission, to do the same ministry as him. That's what being sown is about. It's being sent by Jesus into our world. And up until this point, we've been talking about the fact that we have the opportunity to sow in those kind of random acts of kindness in small, simple ways, the love of God. But this week, we're going to take it a bit further. We're going to talk about not just planting the seed, but also watering it, about nourishing it, because that's what seeds need. We find this in our scripture passage today from 1 Corinthians chapter 3, which was one of Paul's letters to the church at the Greek city of Corinth. And there, Paul was writing to a church that was divided. Imagine that. A church that had some issues going on within it. And one of the first things that he addressed was the division around different leaders. You see, there were different factions of people who had arisen who were following different leaders in the early church. Some said, I follow Apollos. Others said, I follow Peter. And still others said, I follow Paul. But to that, Paul said to them, did I die for you? Was I crucified for you? Were you baptized in my name? The answer, of course, is no. No, you weren't. He wanted to put the emphasis on Jesus because Jesus is the foundation of the church. Jesus is the one in which the church is rooted and built up. Jesus is that sure start for everything. He's the one we're supposed to be united around. And it's in the midst of that discussion of our role, of what we each play in it, that he said, I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God has been making it grow. I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God has been making it grow. It reminds us of a few things in this passage. One is that this is not just a simple one-off thing. It's not an instantaneous thing, but it is a process, right? There are multiple steps. It requires persistence. It requires coming back consistently and being involved. And then it's something that involves multiple people. It's not just what one person does, but it often involves many different people in that process of a person coming to faith. Because Paul is talking about how a person grows spiritually. And the third is that ultimately, this is about God and what God does. It's not about what we do. That should take some of the burden off of our shoulders, but it also takes off, any desire we might have to gloat or take the credit, and it gives it to God because God is the one who makes it grow. Paul used a beautiful analogy of a seed growing, which is really helpful for me because I like gardening. This weekend, Chastity and I were with Evelyn, and we took our little egg cartons and we filled them up with potting soil, and we planted our seeds for our garden. Now, looking out the window today, I'm kind of wondering when we're actually going to get to take those outside, but we are hopeful. Gardening is something that I've enjoyed doing since I was a little boy because my grandmother would garden in our back lawn. She spent her summers in Florida, her winters in Florida. That would be totally backwards. Her winters in Florida, but would come in the summer and live with my parents and my sister and I. And she would tend this garden out back. In the spring, my dad would get out his rototiller and he'd put some fertilizer out and he'd rototill it into the soil and break it all up, break all those clods up so that we could plant. He'd remove the stones that just seemed to appear every year, get it all ready so it was nice and in kind of rows. And my grandma would get her hand implements out, get her hoe, and she would make nice little rows for the plants to be seated in. And she'd dig a little trench. And then was my favorite part, the part that I got to be involved in. She would open up those seed packets and she would squat down and she would place them in my hand. And she would tell me where to place them. And I got to put them into the hole and then, cover it over with dirt with my hand. And if only it was as easy as that. Because then for the next 3 weeks, we would have to come back and we would have to water it. And we would have to water it. And we would have to water it with nothing to show. When you are 4 years old, 3 weeks is the longest time of your life. It just seems like an eternity. It's like, when is this going to happen? When is it going to sprout? It seemed like what we were doing was pointless, like it was fruitless, like nothing was ever going to sprout. But then when it did sprout, it was always the most exciting part. I just remember being filled with excitement and thinking, I have brought forth life from the earth. Maybe you can relate to that a little bit if you've ever had the pleasure of planting something yourself and seeing it come up. But my childhood arrogance, I had such a little part to play in that. All I did was drop the seed into the hole and then cover it up with dirt. My dad had done all that other stuff before. My grandmother had done all of it. And then she was mostly the one continuing to nourish it and water it while I ran around looking for bugs. So little was involved, but it reminds us on this passage, right? It's the same thing of multiple people. It takes multiple steps. It's persistence, and ultimately, we don't determine whether or not that seed grows, right? We can try to provide the right conditions, but we can't make it grow. That's what Paul is drawing on here. He's drawing on this idea, this understanding of what's going on when you plant a simple seed, because that's the same way that people grow spiritually, the same way that people come to faith. It's a process that happens well before a person ever believes. If we find good soil in a person, right, a receptiveness to the gospel of Jesus, to the love of God, then we know that God has been at work. By God's grace, God has used different people, different times, different events, different things to help cultivate a receptiveness in that person to draw them to himself. God's been there and working. And if you're not somebody who would call yourself a follower of Jesus, if you're not somebody who would say you're a Christian, then maybe that's hard to believe. Maybe when you look at your own life, instead of seeing God's handiwork, you see pain. You have questions. There's different things that you look at, and you're just thinking, I don't think so. Well, I can say when I look at my own life, I see those struggles. I see the pain. I see things in my past that I would not have chosen to go through myself. I see things that happened in my past that I also was responsible for. But in all of it, I'm much more overwhelmed and interested in the way that God has worked, that I can see his handiwork leading me up to this point, that I can see that God has been working throughout it. The questions that I have seem to have some answers, that if the world really is as unjust and evil as we sometimes paint it out to be, then why do we have a desire for justice? Why do we have a desire for good? If the world isn't broken as we as Christians understand it and the Bible portrays it, then why do we sense that? If the world really was as bad as we think it was, wouldn't we just be okay with that? I can see that God has worked in my life when I look back, in spite of all of those things. I grew up in a family that loved God and loved one another. And every Sunday you'd find us at Clymer United Methodist Church, a little church where we'd be in worship and Sunday school together. But it wasn't until I was 13 years old when a speaker named Josh Shipp came to speak at our youth group that I really decided to follow Jesus for myself. Now, Josh, we ironically have one of his books out in the welcome area, but he was just getting started as a speaker and was going around and doing different things. And he came and spoke to our youth group. He shared his story and invited us to follow Jesus. I and about 12 other people that day decided to follow Jesus for ourselves. And you might hear that and think, well, Josh must have a great story. He must be a great and engaging speaker. And he does, and he is. But for me, when I look back, I realize that was just one step in the journey. Right? I can look back at my life and I can see all of these different people who were in my church, who were in my family, who were in my community that were sowing into my life, and they were also nourishing that which had already been planted. I don't even really remember the earliest time that I heard the message of Jesus. But I remember many, many times when people nourished that faith in me. And Josh just got to be the person who invited me to make the big step of following Jesus, to cross that threshold and step into faith. It reminds us that, again, it is about a multi-step process where multiple people are involved, that we each have a part to play in it. It's not just a one big time with an evangelist or a speaker who come and does a really big message, and that's when people come to faith. Right? We are cultivating faith by the simple actions of love and speaking the good news in people's lives over and over. One of the best ways that I've heard this process described is by a Cru staff member named Roger Hershey, Cru being Campus Crusade for Christ. He leads up the regional headquarters here in Westfield. And Roger is the kind of guy who, when he gets onto a plane to take a flight, the person next to him 3 hours later is normally following Jesus after if they weren't before. Which puts me to shame, because when I get on a flight, when I go somewhere, I sit down and the person to my right puts on their headphones and the person to my left falls asleep, and I'm kind of left there in the middle, not sure what I should do. But Roger has an expectation that God is going to do some big things in his life and in the world. He's going expectant that God has already been working in people's lives, and maybe he might just have an opportunity to help somebody follow Jesus when he gets on one of those planes. He's expecting it. He's quick to acknowledge as well that when people do decide to follow Jesus after they've talked with him, it's normally because God's already been working up to that point to ready them. He likes to liken it to a football game, or where you're driving toward the end zone. When we're thinking about football, we might think of those big plays. Our favorite play in football for most people is a Hail Mary, which is where the quarterback takes the snap, drops back, and then just throws the ball as far as possible down toward the end zone for the receiver to catch, to try to score a touchdown. We love those plays. The most famous was in 1984 at the Orange Bowl, where Boston College, led by quarterback Doug Flutie, scored in the final seconds to defeat the Miami Hurricanes. Voted, I believe, the 20th century's -- sports moment in one poll. We love plays like that, the big plays that happen. But more often than not, a touchdown, a game is won by those consistent drives of moving forward, of just getting positive yardage. There might be some where you lose yardage, but overall, you're consistently driving toward the end zone. And Roger likes to say that we need to think of people's spiritual walks of coming to faith in the same way. That we need to help them get positive yardage, to make +1 experiences, to get one step, 1 yard closer to Jesus. We often think we can maybe get one of those big, Hail Mary plays. But we call it a Hail Mary because it has a prayer's chance. We might love to have the opportunity to meet a lifelong atheist who just has so many questions keeping them from faith and has had so many bad experiences, and in 10 minutes after chatting with them, they decide to follow Jesus. But friends, that would be a Hail Mary. More often than not, we are coming alongside people wherever they are in their walk and simply helping them move that one step closer. We don't know where a person is when we first encounter them, right? They could be on their own 1 yard line, 99 yards from Jesus, or they could be on the 1 yard line, taking one step closer into the end zone to start a relationship with him. Right? We don't know where somebody is. And it doesn't matter whether we're the person who helps them from the 1 yard line into the end zone or from the 1 yard line to the 2 yard line. Right? God has simply called us to help them make +1 experiences. That could be something like helping them overcome a question that they have, a struggle that they've dealt with, or more often than not, I think it's just simply coming alongside them and showing them the hope that you have, showing them that there is something different about us as Christians, helping them overcome some of maybe the bad experiences that they've had in the past. It's helping them make those little tiny steps towards Jesus, +1 experiences. This kind of thing happens not only to get a person to faith, but also after they've decided to believe, right? If you've ever gardened, you know that you don't stop watering the plants once they sprout, right? If only it were that easy that you just throw the seed in the ground, it sprouts, you're done, right? Then you come back for the harvest. No, you have to continue to nurture and nourish that seed that's planted, that's sprouted. You have to continue to cultivate it if you're going to see it be fruitful. And that's what God has called us to, is fruitfulness. God desires that we would not just accept the forgiveness that's offered in Jesus, right? Wonderful forgiveness, but also to live into the freedom that's offered in him. To be filled with the same love that Jesus had. To be filled with the love of God. That would transform our lives and transform our world. That's what God wants to see for all of us. It's a process we often call sanctification. Right? It's just a really churchy word for being more like Jesus. It's for a process that for most of us takes our lives. We have the opportunity to come alongside people and nourish their faith, wherever they might be, before they believe, to belief, or after they've believed, continue to help them be a disciple of Jesus and live as a follower. It's a wonderful opportunity that we have. Maybe if you think about your own experience, your own life, you can identify different people that have helped you come to where you are today. You can think of different people who helped you grow in your faith, who planted seeds and then nourished them. Maybe you don't know when that seed was planted. Maybe you can. Maybe it was at a VBS when you were a kid, a vacation Bible school like we're going to have this summer. Maybe it was a family member who took you to church. Or maybe it was just somebody who lived a life that was different and you wondered what's different about them. That they helped plant a seed, they helped nourish that seed. We have those opportunities each day. We don't have to throw for the end zone, right? We just have to help people get one step closer to Jesus. So as we think about living this out in our lives today, as we think about how this affects our week, our Monday through Saturday, up until this point, we've mainly been talking about sowing seeds just abundantly and extravagantly, which is wonderful and we always should. But beyond just doing a random act of kindness, we want to emphasize opportunities to come alongside someone more persistently, more consistently, to develop a relationship with them and walk with them. We're reminded that Jesus not only preached to the crowds, right, those large crowds that came to hear him, but he also spent a lot of time just eating with people, of talking with them. And for the people that he made the biggest influence on, those disciples of his who he journeyed with for 3 years, he walked alongside them and consistently nourished the faith that had been planted in them, helped them come to believe and to follow and walk. And they were the ones who ultimately went out and helped transform the world, empowered by God's own Spirit, right? Through 12 ordinary people, God changed the world. That's what he wants to do through us. So again, thinking about how can we come along? Who are some people in your life that you can come alongside and help nourish in their faith? Specifically, who are the people that you know that are not following Jesus already? Because we know that there are many of them. Again, 20 minutes from here, there are over 140,000 people. So who can you be walking with? Is it somebody in your kids' sports team, a fellow parent that you see each week? Is it a neighbor, a coworker, a friend? I'd like for you to take this week and think of 5 people who you can write down their name on an index card or a Post-it and put it somewhere where you can see it frequently. And each time you see it, you can pray for those people. And you can pray that God would give you opportunities to love them, to share the love that you have with them for them, very intentionally. It's not about making people into a project, right? It's about cultivating a relationship where we walk together and help nourish that faith. Help them come to understand the riches that are offered to them in Jesus. Who are those 5 people for you? If you're thinking to yourself, well, I don't know if I have 5, non-Christians in my life that I can really write their name down, then you have an additional assignment to find a way to meet people who aren't already in church. And maybe for you, that sounds kind of like a hard thing, but if you think about the gifts and the talents you have, about the passions that you have, if you think about the hobbies that you like, those are natural avenues to meet people and relate with them. Maybe for you, it's something like gardening. Maybe you enjoy gardening, and if you could get together with other people who enjoy gardening too, it's an opportunity to start new friendships. Maybe there's some other hobby or activity. I don't know. The possibilities are really endless. As Pastor Dave said a couple weeks ago, when the Spirit takes you, he can blow you wherever. It would be surprising to see what might happen. But we have the opportunity to intentionally cultivate the faith of people, to help them grow. Ultimately, we can't make them grow, right? That's between them and God. Only God can make it grow. If it were up to us, yes, sure. Even if it were just up to God, sure. But God has given us free will. We all have to choose. So we can't make those things happen. All we can do is be faithful in taking the little steps to help cultivate the right environment for people to grow. As we prepare for offering this morning, we're going to continue our pattern that we've been doing this Lenten season, where rather than passing the offering baskets around, you have the opportunity to come to the center aisles, to come forward and to drop them in the baskets here in the front. And as you do, there are baskets at the end of the pews where you can grab some of the seeds that are in there. Seeds representative of the seed that we have sown in the world this past week, sharing the love of God, the good news. But it's also an opportunity to think about ways that we can be nourishing, opportunities that we intentionally nourished faith. I want you to continue to sow extravagantly, as we've been talking about in our series. To sow just prodigiously. Fling seed wherever. We never know where somebody is when we meet them. We never know what God has been doing in their life up until this point. So we just need to fling that seed and expect that God is going to do great things. But also be on the lookout to nourish consistently, to water what's already been planted, to keep moving. Let's come.